So how many of you went to Sunday school growing up? A good majority of folks. How many of you liked Sunday school growing up? Oh, 2 hands over here, but not so many hands out here. Very interesting. Did you know that Universalists and Unitarians were to blame, were responsible for the advent of Sunday school in the United States, at least liberal religious Sunday school? In Philadelphia in about 1890, Benjamin Rush, who was a signer of the Declaration of Independence, realized that on Sunday, a lot of the children who were working, mostly, were about in the streets and were sort of running amok in the streets. And they decided that it might be good to organize a school where they could be, first of all, collected, and second of all, brought into some understanding of the world and some key understanding of the simple math and reading. That was called the First Day School, and that spread throughout the country, including into New England. And in Boston, the Unitarians, including William Ellery Channing, and a number of ministers in Boston decided that this was not a bad idea, and in fact, on Sunday morning, they could begin to teach the ideals of the Unitarian faith to those children who are collected in these day schools on Sunday morning. So UUs are sort of responsible for what happened afterward and all the Sunday morning education that we all enjoyed. That program sort of went along with the development of public education in the United States, which really happened in the middle part of the 1800s. In fact, it wasn't until a century ago that public education was a requirement for every child, at least through elementary school. So it was 1918 was the date when across the country all children were required at least to attend public school. So our model of Sunday school was just like that. It was a classroom with a teacher lecturing, and in the beginning there was one teacher for a lot of children, and then we began to think about breaking it up into age groups and having teachers for every age group and having a curriculum for each age group. And so it went on. About 80 years ago, in 1936, a commission of appraisal organized by the American Unitarian Association made it clear that moving forward, however, Unitarians needed to give religious education a more central place in the life of the movement. Even back then, there was an understanding that the old process of separating the kids and putting them in the classrooms needed to be changed. The report urged that the entire church program be redefined in terms of education, the entire program. And right away, the association announced plans for upgrading all the course offerings for religious education. One result of this thinking was the hiring of Sophia Lyons-Paz, who ultimately transformed liberal religious education through her work in developing curriculum that ended up being the New Beacon series. And her hope for greater opportunities for thorough training for religious educators in what she held as a worthy profession. 2 years earlier, Angus MacLean had published The New Era in Religious Education, in which he brought John Dewey's ideas of progressive education into liberal religion. MacLean also believed in honoring the role of the religious educator, as he was as actively involved in training ministers and educators at St. Lawrence University, which was then a Universalist seminary. MacLean believed that one of the most important dimensions of children's religious education was the modeling of the whole community. As much as possible, the content of the lessons, or as he would later phrase it, the method of teaching is the message itself. In doing so, we create a fuller and richer understanding of what it means to be compassionate. Our children do, and the importance of the ability to reason, the experience and appreciation of freedom, of mutual tolerance, and understanding of social justice. So the idea that our teachers are not just teaching content, they are teaching by example. And that example has to be carried out into the whole community in order for the message to be fully understood. Growing up in the 50s and early 60s, I was the lucky beneficiary of both the new books of the Beacon series and the philosophy behind them. And to be perfectly honest, I have shared this before, I remember very, very little about Sunday school. But what I do remember quite vividly is walking in the door of my Unitarian congregation and having a feeling of being known and being welcome. It wasn't a small church, and yet having people know me by name and being involved with adults in a great number of all church activities, I can say without hesitation that I was aware, even at the time, of being part of a loving community, being part of something bigger than myself. And that was the culture of the congregation, not specifically a part of the religious education program, but definitely a part of my whole religious education as a young person. Dr. Jackie James, one of our wonderful religious educators, notes that the role of religious education has often been minimized in our congregations. At the turn of the most recent millennium, she wrote, "Too many of our congregations continue to look upon religious education as little more than babysitting while adults participate in the important business of worship. Our facilities, our budget allocations, and our view of religious educators reinforce this view." Around that time, a growing desire for change brought about a convocation of Unitarian Universalist religious leaders, and the resulting publication, Essex Conversations, Visions for Lifespan Education, had the intent of offering discussion points for congregations interested in moving towards a more unified approach to religious education, and thus to a clearer articulation of liberal religious faith in general. Though coming at the subject from multiple directions, one element of all those articles that comes to the fore is the idea of lifespan religious education as part and parcel of faith community in action. People of all ages learn and solidify their values through doing religion and experiencing it together. In his essay entitled Usable Truth, Richard Gilbert himself, a student of Angus MacLean, wrote, "Our young people are entering a crisis-ridden world. I do not believe we are equipping them to deal with it. Well-intentioned promotion of our Unitarian Universalist purposes and principles is inadequate. We need to help create experiences where these values bump up against social reality." Gilbert quotes another educator who wrote, "We live ourselves into religious thinking more than we think ourselves into religious living." The best way for a congregation to create this kind of value-laden bumping is within a multi-generational setting where children and youth can engage in doing religion alongside their adult role models. The Reverend Susan Davidson Archer concurred in her essay, Outside the Box, writing, "Trust, a sense of personal competence and agency, critical thinking skills, and engagement with otherness were some of the powerful elements of childhood with ongoing reinforcements in adulthood that seem to make a difference in how people live their lives. I would hope that in the 21st century," she continued, "we would be intentional with our programming for people of all ages to reinforce these inner experiences of growing." Archer added that the important point that our congregations can be strengthened and can learn more about partnership by practicing it, modeling it for one another, both among children and adults. In the chapter on religious community in her marvelous little book, The Gift of Faith, Jean Newyar talks about the importance of having children and youth experience involvement in the community of worship, in the community of care, and in the community of social action, all of which are important in the growth of the individual. She adds the equally important component of being held in community. It is in relationship, in being cherished, that we are both deepened and broadened. None of these things can happen strictly within the confines of Sunday school. Each involves the sharing and practice of community values and should be experienced in community. No one leader, whether minister or educator, can create these rich experiences by themselves. It takes the intention and collaboration of an entire congregation to bring these opportunities to life. I told you how Unitarians and Universalists helped create what we know as Sunday school, and so, of course, it's a Unitarian Universalist educator named Kimberly Sweeney who has written an article called The Death of Sunday School and the Future of Faith Formation. Seeing the diminishing number of families, she calls once again for a more intentional, all-congregational approach She speaks of how the old model of Sunday school no longer works in this culture or for today's families. Rich Birch is a consultant and founder of the Unseminary Resource website who follows trends in congregational participation. He suggests that when we consider the broader impact of our church, we need to think carefully about how we're reaching the next generation. Congregations that are impacting their community are obsessed with reaching that generation. They spend a lot of time, effort, and energy on reaching out to young people and getting them connected to the church. They spend resources to ensure these ministries are led and funded well. One commonality among congregations in the final gasps of death is that there are no kids left in the church. Keeping an eye close to this ratio over time gives you a sense of the long-term trajectory of a congregation. Trusting the old process isn't working. Families have other options on Sunday mornings, and many families prefer to stay together when they have time away from work and school. And yet they are still a yearning for community, a place where they can all feel welcome, a place where they can belong. Our Unitarian Universalist movement currently offers a vital alternative. Without the dictates of dogma, we are free to create the substantive covenantal communities in which people can recover a sense and a connection to self, to others, and to their spirit. Ours is the tradition that binds us first to the other, and in doing so to all that is holy itself. We can hold each other. We can love each other because of who we are, not in spite of who we are. We can love each other more. We can love each other into being more. But we need to do this modeling with and for the next generation, making a place for them that is relevant and safe, and where they too can experience and connect to something greater than themselves. It takes more than classrooms. It takes more than curriculum. It takes more than great educators. It takes the intention of a whole congregation to make something like that possible. May it be so.